The study smelled like old paper, wood polish, and something faintly citrus, his cologne, maybe. I hadn't expected the house to feel so empty without him, even with the furniture still in place. The air was thick with silence. I stood in the center of the room holding the will my siblings had handed me just days after our father's funeral. A single line under my name, to Olivia, I leave the porcelain fisherman figurine from my study. That was it. Michael and Grace were already making plans to list the house. Grace had a buyer lined up. Michael had a contractor scheduled to spruce the place up. They spoke like Dad was a footnote. Like I hadn't spent the last 3 years in this house, bathing him, feeding him, holding his hand through the tremors. I had pressed pause on my life, on my career, to make sure his last years were dignified. And now I was being handed a keepsake while they divvied up the estate. I sank into the leather armchair by the window and let myself cry for the first time in days. Not just for the loss, but for the betrayal. Something about the will didn't sit right. Dad had always been fair. Meticulous. And above all, he was grateful, he said it every day. So why would he leave me nothing? I wiped my eyes, and they landed on the bookshelf across the room. Treasure Island. It was our favorite when I was a kid. We used to play this game. He'd hollow out old books, hide tiny notes or candy inside. For Olivia's eyes only, he'd say with a wink. My feet moved before my mind did. I crossed the room, pulled the book off the shelf, and opened the middle. Inside, nestled in a carved-out space, was a small black USB drive and a folded yellow note. If something feels wrong, trust your instincts. Mr. Patterson has what you need. Love, Dad. My hands trembled, but not from grief. Something wasn't over. Not yet. I drove home in a fog, one hand gripping the steering wheel, the other clenched tightly around the note. My father's handwriting, the loops, the slant, the little way he wrote his T, it was him. Undeniably him. My siblings might have the papers, the signatures, the attorneys on speed dial, but I had something they didn't, the voice behind the pen. Back in my apartment, I ignored the dishes in the sink, the stack of sympathy cards on the counter. I plugged the USB into my laptop and waited as the screen flickered to life. There was only one file, Olivia_final.mp4. I clicked. The video opened with a shot of my father sitting at his old desk in the study, the same room I had just left. He looked frail, his shoulders narrow, his face thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were sharp. Alert. Clear. Hey, kiddo, he said with a soft smile. I covered my mouth. I hadn't heard his voice since the day he passed. It hit me like a tidal wave. If you're watching this, he continued, then something didn't go the way it was supposed to. He paused, breathing carefully. I could hear the Parkinson's in his breath, but not in his mind. I know your brother and sister mean well, in their own way. But they'd been distant. Detached. And when it came time to finalize things, I saw where their heads were. They were more interested in protecting the estate than protecting you, the one who's actually been here. He reached for a piece of paper off-screen. They convinced me to draft a version of my will with a simplified split. I let them see it. I didn't argue. Sometimes, it's easier to give people what they expect. He looked up again. But the real will, the one that reflects my wishes, is with Mr. Patterson, my attorney. It's signed. It's notarized. It's on file. In it, you receive the house and half of everything else. Michael and Grace split the rest. My breath caught. I know they'll be upset. They'll say it isn't fair. But fair isn't about splitting things evenly. It's about seeing people. You put your life on hold for me, Olivia. You were the only one who saw me not as a responsibility or an inconvenience, but as a father. As a person. And I want that to mean something when I'm gone. He leaned forward slightly, voice softer now. I hope you never have to watch this. But if you do, know that I trust you. And I'm proud of you. The screen faded to black. I sat in silence for a long time, tears tracing hot lines down my face. Then I opened a new tab in my browser and searched, Mr. Howard Patterson, Portland Estate Attorney. I wasn't going to fight. I was going to finish what he started. Mr. Patterson's office was tucked away in a quiet corner of downtown Portland, the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. No flashy signage. No high-rise lobby. Just a brass nameplate beside a wooden door, aged but polished, Howard E. Patterson, Attorney at Law. The moment I stepped inside, the quiet wrapped around me like a second skin, bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes, an antique clock ticking steadily on the wall, and a secretary who greeted me like she'd been expecting me all along. "You must be Olivia," she said gently. "Mr. Patterson is ready for you." I stepped into his office, where a silver-haired man with kind eyes stood and offered his hand. "Your father spoke very highly of you," he said as we Saturday, he made it clear this day might come. He pulled open a locked drawer and placed a manila envelope on the desk between us. "This," he said, "is your father's final and legally binding will. Executed, notarized, and filed 2 months before his passing." My hands trembled as I opened it. It was real. Every word. Every line. It was exactly as my father had said in the video. The house, the one I'd helped him modify for his care, the one I'd cleaned, maintained, and filled with life, was left to me. So was half of the financial estate. Michael and Grace were listed as secondary beneficiaries. No mention of the porcelain figurine. No vague sentiments. Just clear, intentional choices. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "How could they have shown me a completely different will?" Mr. Patterson folded his hands. "They showed you a draft. Your father allowed them to see an early version he never filed. It was part of his strategy, Olivia. He suspected they'd try to get ahead of things." "Did he know how bad it was going to be?" Mr. Patterson looked at me kindly. "He didn't want to assume the worst. But he prepared for it, because he trusted you to do what was right if the moment came." I left the office with a certified copy of the will, a notarized statement from Mr. Patterson, and a fire inside me that burned away the grief just enough to make room for resolve. Back at the house, Grace and Michael were already there. They'd parked side by side in the driveway, discussing roof inspections and paint colors like the place was theirs. I stepped out of the car with my bag over my shoulder, heart pounding but face calm. "Hey," Grace said, flipping through papers. "We were thinking neutral tones for the exterior, makes it easier to sell fast." "Great," Michael added, not looking up. "Can you sign the seller's authorization today? We've got an agent on standby." I didn't answer. I walked into the house, straight to the living room, and set my laptop on the coffee table. "Actually," I said quietly, "before we do anything, I think we need to watch something." They glanced at each other, amused. "Liv, what is this?" Grace asked, arms folded. I clicked play. The screen filled with the image of our father, sitting in the very room we stood in. His voice, steady and sincere, poured through the speakers. "If you're watching this, Olivia, then they've already shown you their version of my will." Michael stopped pacing. Grace's face slowly drained of color. "But this is the one that counts," our father continued. I stood silently as the words they couldn't argue with filled the room. They didn't interrupt. They didn't speak. They just listened, as the man they'd overlooked, ignored, and dismissed reminded them that love isn't measured in inheritance or spreadsheets, but in presence. In sacrifice. In truth. When the video ended, I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Because everything they thought they'd buried had just come back to life, and this time, it had a signature, a timestamp, and a witness. Michael was the first to speak. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, pacing toward the window. "That video doesn't prove anything." He was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. Grace didn't say anything at first. She just sat there, blinking slowly, as if replaying every word, every sentence from our father's voice. She looked pale, like someone realizing the ground they'd built their certainty on was actually sand. I opened my bag and placed the certified will on the coffee table, along with a notarized affidavit from Mr. Patterson. "This is the official, legally binding version," I said calmly. "Not the one you found in the desk drawer. That was a draft Dad never filed. This one? It was signed, witnessed, and registered 2 months before he passed, while he was fully competent." Grace finally spoke. "Why didn't he tell us?" "Because he didn't trust you," I said, meeting her eyes. "Because he knew exactly how this would play out." Michael scoffed. "We took care of things. We were planning to sell the house to split it fairly." I folded my arms. "You mean your version of fair? The one where I gave up 3 years of my life, my job, my relationships, while you two called once a week and asked if I'd checked the thermostat?" He opened his mouth to argue, but there was nothing to say. Because it was true. Every word. I pulled out my phone and opened a video call with Mr. Patterson. His face appeared instantly, calm and professional. "Good evening, Olivia," he said. "Are Michael and Grace present?" "They are," I replied. "Then allow me to confirm," he continued, "the document Olivia is presenting is indeed your father's valid will. Signed, notarized, and filed under my care. The video testimony you've just watched was created in my office, on the same day. I have a medical evaluation from Dr. Brill confirming his full mental capacity at the time." Grace's voice cracked. "So, that's it? We get nothing?" Mr. Patterson remained composed. "According to the document, you each receive a share of the remaining financial assets, equal parts. But the house, and the caregiver fund, go entirely to Olivia." Michael looked like he might explode. "We're going to contest this. There's no way this holds up. It's manipulation. She probably convinced him to change it." I looked at him without flinching. "He wrote that letter before he could barely walk. Before I even knew there was a change. He trusted me. That's what scares you most, isn't it?" Silence. Mr. Patterson adjusted his glasses. "You are, of course, free to pursue legal action. But I should advise you, video testimony is admissible in Oregon. Coupled with medical confirmation and a properly filed will, your chances in court are minimal. And public." That landed. Michael swallowed hard, the first hint of fear flickering behind his eyes. Grace closed her folder of sale papers slowly. "What do you want, Olivia?" I looked around the room, the house I'd helped remodel when Dad's tremors got worse, the walls I had painted, the hallway where I used to guide him gently back to bed when he wandered at night. I thought about the medications I'd organized, the meals I'd spooned, the stories I'd listened to even when he couldn't finish them. "I want the house," I said simply. "I want what he left me. And I want you to stop pretending you know anything about what fairness means." They didn't respond. Not right away. Because there was nothing left to deny. No more shadows to hide behind. Our father's voice had already spoken the truth. And it had been recorded, filed, and witnessed. For once, I wasn't asking for recognition. I was enforcing it. The next morning, Michael sent me a text. "Grace and I have talked. We're not going to fight it. It's not worth the drama. Just, make sure Dad's accounts are closed properly. We'll coordinate with the attorney. No apology. No remorse. Just a retreat masked as diplomacy." It didn't surprise me. Later that week, Grace called. Her voice was quieter than usual. Not cold, just tired. "I didn't know he felt that way," she said. "Yes, you did," I replied. There was a long pause on the line. "Maybe. But I didn't think it would matter in the end." "It always matters," I said. "You just chose to ignore it." She didn't argue. Didn't get defensive. She just sighed. "Well, I hope you do something good with it." "I will," I said, and hung up. The house was mine now, not just by law, but by memory. By effort. By the years I had poured into it while they counted the value of its walls. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just walked from room to room, touching the corners that had held our quiet moments, the kitchen table where Dad scribbled poetry before his hands gave out, the den where we watched Jeopardy together every evening, the back patio where he used to sit in silence, staring into the trees as if they held answers to questions he couldn't ask anymore. I kept everything that mattered. His books. His records. The chair he loved that no one else ever used. And I gave away the rest, the things that had always been about appearance, not connection. Then I sat down with Mr. Patterson and asked a single question. How much would it take to start a foundation? He raised an eyebrow. A foundation? I want to name it after him. Something for caregivers. For daughters, sons, spouses, anyone who puts their life on hold for someone else's dignity. He smiled slowly. I think your father would have liked that. Within weeks, I had paperwork filed, the David Chen Foundation for Compassionate Care. A small nonprofit, modest in its beginning, but real. It would offer grants and stipends to unpaid family caregivers for Parkinson's patients. The kind of people no one sees, until it's too late. Michael and Grace didn't show up to the launch. I didn't invite them. Instead, I invited hospice nurses, neighborhood volunteers, and old family friends. People who had dropped off meals or stayed late to help me lift Dad from bed to chair. People who knew what caregiving really meant, not as duty, but as devotion. I spoke briefly at the event, standing beneath a simple banner and a framed photo of Dad, smiling on the porch in one of his rare good days. I didn't expect anything in return for being here, I told the crowd. But I received more than I could have imagined. Not just in this house, but in the message he left behind. He saw me. He remembered. That night, I walked through the halls of the house with the windows open and the lights low. I passed the bookshelf and paused, fingering the spine of Treasure Island before placing it back exactly where I'd found it. Not hollowed anymore. Not hiding anything. Just a book. And a memory. And a promise fulfilled. Spring came early that year. The cherry blossoms bloomed along the sidewalks of my neighborhood, painting the street in soft pink petals that drifted like snow whenever the wind picked up. It was the kind of quiet beauty my father loved, the kind that didn't ask for attention but commanded it anyway. I thought about him often in those months, not out of grief, but in gratitude. For the truth he left me. For the trust. The foundation grew slowly, word spreading through community clinics and caregiver forums. I started getting emails, thank you notes from people I'd never met. A woman in Spokane whose husband could no longer feed himself. A teenage boy in Eugene who had missed his graduation to care for his mother. People who had been living invisibly, like I once had, suddenly seen. Affirmed. Every time a grant was approved, I printed the recipient's name and pinned it to the corkboard in my father's old study, now my office. The board was almost full. One morning, as I was reviewing a new applicant, I received an email from Grace. Short. To the point. Subject, Dad. Message. I visited the grave today. Left lilies. Hope the foundation is going well. Gee. I stared at it for a long moment. I didn't respond. Instead, I closed my laptop and walked into the living room, where the late morning light spilled across the hardwood floor in a golden stripe. Max, the rescue dog I'd adopted a few weeks after the launch, stretched lazily on the rug and looked up at me with sleepy eyes. I sat beside him and rested my hand on his back. I hadn't heard from Michael in months. That was fine. Some people leave silently once they realize they can no longer control the narrative. He hadn't tried to reclaim anything, not the house, not the will, not even the illusion of being the responsible son. I had come to peace with that. With all of it. Because what I had now wasn't about winning. It wasn't about money or real estate or proving a point. It was certainty. The certainty that I had done right by the man who had once carried me on his shoulders through Powell's bookstore, who had read to me when I was too young to understand the stories, who had whispered "I'm proud of you" on the worst days of his illness, when he couldn't lift his hands but still lifted my spirit. I thought of that moment again, the video on the flash drive. His face. His voice. The way he said, "You saw me as a person. Not a burden." I had played that video dozens of times in the beginning. Now, I didn't need to. I could hear the words without watching. They had settled into my bones. That night, I brewed a cup of tea and stood at the kitchen window as the first stars appeared. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore. Max dozed in his corner bed. The foundation papers were stacked neatly on the dining table. And on the bookshelf in the study, right where it belonged, Treasure Island sat upright, no longer hollow. No longer hiding anything. Just waiting, full again, just like me. 1 year to the day after my father passed, I stood on the porch of the house he left me, not just in title, but in truth. The early evening sun bathed the neighborhood in a honey-colored light, the air cool but gentle, the same way it had felt when I used to guide him outside to sit and listen to the wind in the trees. I closed my eyes and let the breeze brush against my face, carrying a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. Inside, the dining table was set, not for family this time, but for community. I was hosting the first annual dinner for the Olivia Chen Foundation for Compassionate Care. Just a dozen people, caregivers, supporters, 2 grant recipients who'd driven in from hours away to say thank you in person. We shared food, stories, laughter. And when the night quieted, I stood to speak. I used to think legacy was measured by what you left behind, homes, money, documents with signatures. But now I know it's what you build while you're still here. The quiet things. The late-night conversations. The people you stay for when no one else does. I looked toward the study, its door slightly ajar, warm light spilling from the desk lamp I'd left on. My father taught me that. Not just with his words, but with how he let me see him, even at his most vulnerable. And when he left this world, he left something better than wealth. He left clarity. He left truth. Afterward, one of the grant recipients, a woman named Teresa, who had spent 4 years caring for her sister, approached me in tears. "No one's ever said thank you like this," she whispered. "No one's ever told us we matter." "You do," I said. As the guests departed, one by one, I stood at the front door, watching the taillights disappear into the dark. Max sat beside me, tail thumping softly. I didn't think about Michael. Or Grace. Or even the battle that almost happened but never did. I thought about the hollow book. The trembling signature. The unwavering voice in the video. And the choice he made to be honest when it counted most. Later that night, I sat in the study, alone. I opened the final message from my father on the USB, one I hadn't played since that first week. He was quieter in this clip. Tired. But smiling. "If you made it this far," he said, "then you already know I loved you. I just wanted to remind you one last time." I pressed pause. Not because I couldn't bear to hear the rest, but because I didn't need to. I knew. I walked to the bookshelf and ran my fingers along the row until I reached Treasure Island. I pulled it out and opened it, not hollow anymore, just full of the story we once shared. I placed a photo of us, me at 6 years old on his shoulders, both of us laughing, inside the cover and slid it back onto the shelf. Not because I needed to remember. But because I wanted to leave something for the next person who wondered where love was kept. And that's how I learned that the most powerful legacies are never hidden in vaults. They're tucked into the quiet places, into hands held, sacrifices made, and truths left behind for those who never stopped showing up. And that's how I learned that real love doesn't always come with applause. It's quiet. It's patient. And sometimes, it leaves proof behind. Have you ever been written out of something you earned with love? Let's talk in the comments. Like if this story moved you. And subscribe for more true revenge stories that hit home.